It is 7:08 on Breakfast. Well, we hear predictions all the time about what's going to happen to the property market. How many times, for example, have you heard the housing market is about to crash? Well, last year, the Property Institute of New Zealand was 100% accurate on all of its 2017 housing predictions. So, here to look into the housing crystal ball once again is Property Institute of New Zealand Chief Executive Ashley Church, who has just released this month's Property Institute Valocity Regional Insights Report. Tēnā koe, good morning.
Good morning and no pressure.
Yeah, no pressure, mate. 100% last year. Well, it is good though. No, you've got to claim your successes in these things because everyone comes out and says, oh, it's going to crash, we're headed for economic disaster, and there are rarely repercussions when people get these things wrong. But it's great to have you here considering the situation in 2018. Crash was the threat in 2017. Is that still a problem this year?
No, and it never was. There's a cyclic aspect to markets which is pretty predictable, and so, I mean, we've been talking for the last couple of years about the fact that there wasn't going to be a crash, there was going to be a settling. That's exactly what's happened. Traditionally, Auckland and New Zealand markets don't crash, they settle. That's pretty much where we're at the moment, so no crash.
Okay, and we're protected somewhat from a crash by the fact we still have such a strong demand for housing, right?
Yeah, all of that as well. It's, I mean, the market's going to continue to be strong as long as there's pressure on the requirement to housing through immigration and some of the other things that are feeding into that. So yeah, that's going to continue.
So if you've got an electric stovetop, and for the last few years you've had it on 8, now you're bringing it back down to about a 4. So it's still there. It's still at the same level. It's just simmering away instead of wildly boiling.
Yeah, it's interesting you should use that analogy because there's a thing called the property clock, which we use as 12 o'clock as the peak market and 6 o'clock as the bottom of the market. And at the moment we're probably sitting close to 5 o'clock, 5:30. So we're getting down toward the bottom of the market.
Okay. How will the market in 2018 look for owners versus investors, owner-occupiers versus investors? So
it's interesting. So during a boom market, which is what we've been through over the last 5 or 6 years, there's a whole range of things that happen, all of which are turned on their head when a market's in the phase that it's in at the moment. So for owner-occupiers, people are looking at buying a property over the next 2 to 3 years while we're in this flattening period. It's actually a pretty good time. It means that prices will be stable. It means that they can be a little bit more considered about what they do in terms of looking, that they can negotiate prices to some degree. Conversely, for investors, also turned completely on its head. They've had 4 or 5 years of strong capital growth. That's pretty much gone. Most of those folk are, particularly in the northern half of the North Island, own properties that are actually costing the money to own, and they've been prepared to do that because of the capital growth. So now they're getting the double whammy of no capital growth and a cost of ownership. So for people that aren't experienced as investors, often that actually scares them out of the market.
Yeah, is that likely to impact rental prices?
Yes, it is. So what will happen is over the next 12 months, that's one of the things that we're actually predicting in our predictions, that there'll actually be some sell-off of property by investors, particularly inexperienced investors, and that will essentially reduce the available supply, which will push prices up.
Okay, let's talk a little more about the rental market. Where are you expecting rents to spike the most, and what are the other driving forces?
So rents will spike pretty much anywhere where there is demand. So that's going to be Auckland, Wellington, Christchurch, Tauranga, all of the typical
main
locations.
Centres, yeah.
Pretty much, yeah. And that will be a combination of what we just talked about, the fact that some people will desert the market, partly the continuing increase in population, and partly as a result of the fact that, as I mentioned before, you're not getting capital growth anymore. Investors look to the extent that they can do so to maximise the return that they get, and that's usually in the form of rent, so they'll push their rentals up.
Interest rates have been creeping up slowly over the last 18 months or so. What are you expecting in 2018?
Probably another year like last year, which is about 0.5% in those 3, 4 and 5 year rates. And the reason for that's twofold. One of them is because the banks obviously want to pay depositors more because they want to get as much of their money as they can from within New Zealand. And the other reason for that is in anticipation that there might be something happen in the world economy. It's about getting people into shorter term rates so that the impact on the banks is as minimal as it can be.
How are the new government's policies likely to impact the market?
Yeah, it'll be interesting. I think you'll see an increase in the construction of houses. And that's going to be partly as a result of the policies of the previous government working their way through the system, and partly as a result of some of the stuff that Twyford's doing with housing. So you will see an increase. It won't be anything near what we require, and Twyford himself has said that we're not going to get anything like that 10,000 per year that we require, but we will make some inroads this year, and the move is in the right direction.
Okay, great to chat as always. Thanks for your predictions. That's Ashley Church, the CEO of the Property Institute of New Zealand.
Still ahead, the apps on your phone leaving it unsecure. And after the break, no one gives State of the Nation speeches as good as him. At least that's what he thinks.